Hey, welcome, everybody, to the NonSequitur Show. I'm Steve, and that's not Kyle over there, as you may notice. Or it could be Kyle with long hair. Long hair hippie Kyle. No, Kyle has a prior engagement tonight, so he will be not joining us. But we do have a substitute, Dave McGinnis, producer and interviewer as well. He's going to be kind of leading this particular show, and he's going to introduce our guest tonight, which is the Scathing Atheist, who, by the way, we've had like 20 minutes of convo before we even started that, I mean, it's just been so awesome so far. So I'm guaranteeing you this is going to be one of my more favorite shows, because this has been thrilling to have a conversation with this guy before he even went on air. So I expect great things for this particular episode. But David, by the way, first, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great tonight, Steve. How are you doing?
Sweet. I am doing fantastic. It's been a wonderful week, so let's kind of keep it up. You kind of know our guest a little bit because this is arranged through you. So why don't you kind of introduce him to the live chat, and we just kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, we've got Eli from the Scathing Atheist podcast, as well as God Awful Movies, Citation Needed, and the Skepticism, and I think a blog that not enough people read. That's
nobody reads blogs. I love
exactly,
blogging.
Yeah.
Blogging's great. They should be read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do want to just sort of like give people a little bit of background, Eli, for those who don't know you. And he's not he is the Scathing Atheist in the same way that Seth Andrews is the Thinking Atheist. It's not quite a thing.
Oh, please! I wish I scathed as hard as Seth's thought. My name's Eli. I'm a comedian from New York City. I have a couple of shows, which you just mentioned, the Scathing Atheist, God Awful Movies, where we review terrible Christian movies. We're on episode 160 something now, so I've seen 160 something Christian movies at this point. We also have a political show called The Skepticism, and a show where we make fun of Wikipedia articles called Citation Needed. So thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Really,
Yeah,
really, you go to like Wikipedia and you say this is not cited correctly, because I find a lot of errors in Wikipedia. Not gonna front.
No, it's more of like like a comedy roast of yeah. We're not pointing out anybody's incorrections. We're making up our own. Yeah, we are definitely not fixing anything about Wikipedia. The catchphrase for the show is because this is the internet and that's how it works now. So the whole premise of the show is one of us reads a Wikipedia article, everyone else makes fun of it as we're reading it. But the idea is, I'm an expert on this subject because I've read the Wikipedia article. So we're sort of poking fun at the
Wikipedia. Yes. Wikipedians, and if you read a Wikipedia article, you are an automatic expert. It's just the way it is. Because it's just true that if it's on the internet, it has to be true, right? I mean, that's kind of a law, right? Okay.
Although
that's how it works now.
One thing that people are missing out on is not enough people know about Wikipedia chat pages. My friends in the chat watching.
Oh.
If you have not been on a Wikipedia chat page, just imagine 900 of the bitchiest people who live to correct grammar all having a fight at all trying to drive the same car. Just put 9 of your worst friends on different parts of a steering wheel. That's a Wikipedia chat page. And if you go to one of the like controversial ones like 9/11 or the moon landing or vaccinations or anything, it's just a combination of bizarre vengeance schemes and vendettas and personal fights. It is, if you want to watch the human drama play out writ large, go to any Wikipedia chat page and watch 9 randos from 8 different parts of the globe lose their fucking minds. It is well worth it, my friends.
So, I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that you guys put on the show, particularly in Scathing, and you look at the kind of guests that we have on here, we have the displeasure oftentimes of having to interact directly with the people. I think that you guys did a How Bullshit Is It segment recently, but I think the last episode that dropped on urine therapy.
On urine therapy, yes, we did.
Yeah. So we've had those people on the show. We've had people who we had a show on somebody who thinks that their salt cabbage juice water can regrow limbs and cure gayness. And then there was Soul Phone. Tell them about Soul Phone, Steve. That was it.
Soul Phone is a project they believe that they're going to have this communication system where you can have different levels of communication with the dead. You can have a basic yes or no, like Ouija board type communication. I guess it would be some light that flashes once for yes and two for no. I don't know. And then there's another one called soul video, where you actually are communicating with this anthropomorphized static or something. I don't know the details. They didn't provide any. I asked questions relating to their methodology. I've asked questions about how this actually works. All I got was, oh, I know nothing about it, but the guy that I work for, he's the expert on it. Then why aren't we having him come on and explain it? But it's bizarre.
And,
It's
like,
basically
isn't this through a
communication with
university or something?
well, no, I mean,
Isn't he like
the engineer that's doing it, he is an actual PhD, Dr. Schwartz, but it's basically high tech mediumship. That's all it really is. It's basically the mediumship with a twist to it, right? That's all. No difference.
Yeah. So I mean, they're basically like Skype the dead is essentially what they're
Skype the
selling.
dead.
But
I like that.
Like you need, yeah. It's like sounds like the name of a really bad emo band.
Or a really good one. But what would be the point? When I asked the gentleman, what information can you glean from this dead entity? I mean, if you asked him, hey, Uncle Fester, where did you put the fucking will that's you left by millions of dollars hidden somewhere? And he just says something like, night sky, blue rock. That's not going to convey much information to me, right? So he didn't have any explanation of what's going to be considered to be an actual communication with this quote unquote dead relative. Oh, by the way, it's not just dead relatives. You can talk to Einstein. You can talk to Nikola Tesla.
Oh, and they're helping with the
Tesla in the
project.
afterlife wants to talk to you. Yeah, Tesla's helping with the project, I guess.
Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah. Do you want to tell the audience though a little bit more, like about yourself, your background, like what you do when you're not podcasting, that kind of thing? Let's kick things off.
Oh, so I was born and raised in upstate New York. I went to NYU for drama. And when I'm not podcasting, I run a magic show in New York, as y'all can see from the I'm doing the mirror thing, as y'all can see from the various books behind me. But what I do for a living full time is the podcast. I actually do all of our shows for a living full time. We just got back from England, where we were at QED, the largest skeptics convention in the world. We got a chance to work with those guys. It was absolutely fabulous. If anyone watching this hasn't been to QED before or hasn't been to a convention before, QED is top of the chain. So make sure you check it out.
And I love skepticism type stuff, but I don't use the word for myself. You being a philosophical guy, skepticism has a lot of different meanings, right? And skeptic has a lot of different real actually meanings. I prefer skeptical, right? I mean, I'm skeptical versus when it comes to like things like homeopathy and astrology and all that pseudoscience bullshit, right? But do you label yourself as a skeptic as far as skepticism, or just because you don't buy into the same nonsense that we don't buy into?
Yeah, no, I claim the label of skeptic pretty proudly. I think skepticism has a really good overlap with education right now, especially as a community. And it also is a really, really good way for a lot of, now, obviously, skepticism's name has sort of been besmirched by moon landing deniers and vaccine skeptics, right? So there are people who use the word skeptic, but the skeptic community has done a tremendous amount of good. And one of the things that we've really gotten to see over the last 10 or 15 years or so is how important that education is and how much good it's done, especially utilizing the internet to educate people about things like homeopathy. Before we recorded, I started talking about the work of this guy, Michael Marshall, who's actually one of the organizers of QED. And he managed through skeptical activism to get the NHS to no longer cover homeopathy in the north of England, which is just an absolutely tremendous win, because it means that people are no longer being prescribed pseudoscience, and more importantly, people are not paying for it with their tax money, right? So if something's not covered, you don't have doctors saying, well, I could give you chemotherapy, but you've requested this homeopathic treatment instead, and it's on the NHS, so I have to give it to you. So I think that is where skepticism can really do a tremendous amount of good in the world. And if you follow the work of people like Michael Marshall or Andy Wilson or the organizers at QED or the Skeptical Society of Europe, I actually got to be on a panel with their head over at QED, and she is brilliant. So watching what they do with education and actually helping people is really inspiring, and sort of awesome to watch from the outside or from the next to, as the case may be.
I totally get that.
So,
I mean, that actually is a very rational approach to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, so like since we're talking about labels and whatnot, one of the more controversial labels among some of the people within our audience is social justice and social justice warriors. You count yourself amongst that group.
I do. I am
correct?
a proud social justice warrior.
Okay. Yeah, and
To battle.
I agree.
To arms.
I agree with most, I think, things in social justice movements, other than maybe some of the more extreme ways that people try to actually move towards their goals. I think that they can be a bit overbearing at times. But I think I'm Canadian, so warrior is just too aggressive. I'd say I'm a social justice advocate.
You need a social justice apology. That's the Canadian thing.
You're such a pussy, Dave.
But we got the weed now, so everybody's just going to mellow out.
Legal weed, exactly. If if possible, Canadians will get more chill.
Wait, it's not legal in Canada yet. I don't have prosecute. That's a difference.
No, it's legal.
No, it's legal. I can go to my liquor store and buy weed. Yeah, everywhere.
When did this happen?
Federally.
When did
last week?
October 12th.
Oh, because I just had this discussion like 4 or 5 months ago, and so it had to be something really recent.
It's legal across the board. Yeah, no, it's totally legal, recreational. You can store an unlimited amount of weed in your house. No, not yet.
You're high as balls. Okay.
No, I purposely left the weed on the table for now. I'm not going to touch that yet. But
I did not know this. Good to know.
Yeah, no, it's totally a thing. But yeah, no. With that label, do you think that there's anything that happens within the social justice community that you would call out as like that shouldn't be part of the social justice movement? Like these are bad actors within the community, or?
Yeah, I mean, there are bad actors within every community. And, one of the things that I consider to sort of be my contribution to being a social justice warrior or to social justice is to be the voice of someone who was born and raised in upstate New York, who came with some pretty bad ideas. I growing up, I was pretty racist, pretty sexist, pretty homophobic, and have slowly, through the care and love of the people around me, been able to see some of these ideas for what they are. I was lucky enough to participate in a lot of programs that involved mental health care. I was part of something called The Reality Show at NYU that was a bunch of safe space training and trigger warning training and depression training and mental health training. So I went through a ton of this training in order to learn these things myself. And the obligation that I feel from that is to sort of pass on what I learned. And one of the sort of big misconceptions that people come to me about is they'll say, well, what do you think of so-and-so? And it doesn't matter who so-and-so is. They've always got someone, where Dan Errol the other day tweeted that I should be able to hit this person with a bat until they're dead. And Dan Errol knows that I love to use him as my go-to example, but there are bad actors, and I'm not necessarily calling Dan a bad actor, but there are bad actors within every community. There are people who I disagree with within every community. But there are a lot of ideas within social justice that when you know what they mean, people instantly go, oh, I'm not against that. The example, I know you've heard me use this before, but the example I use all the time is a safe space, right? It's impossible to go to pretty much any corner of the internet without someone being like, safe space, oh, I'm going to wear my diaper and get my sad clothes on because I'm going to be in my safe space. And then I'm like, hey, do you know what safe spaces are? And they're like, well, it's a place where wimps go to cry. And I say, well, no, actually, they got their origin in the 1980s because Christian groups were sending Christians into LGBTQ support groups to tell people there who were sharing their stories about being gay or lesbian or trans or non-binary that they were going to burn in hell. And because they were in an LGBT group, there was nothing that could really stop that person from going in and just saying these terrible things. So they established something called a safe space, which was the idea that you could go into this space, you could say what you needed to say without judgment, without reserve, and that it was quite literally a safe space to say and do things that don't come with all the constructions of, you know, a normal conversation. So for instance, you've got a homophobic dad, right, who's kicked you out of the house and you're in a safe space and you want to talk about how much you'd like to kill your dad, right? The confines of a safe space are built, and there's quite a bit of evidence to sort of back this up in the mental health community. They're built around a combination of venting, but also making it a safe place for like-minded people to express things that they cannot vent in the outside world. And having talked to internet trolls and self-named Nazis, when I've explained that, no one has ever said, I don't think that thing should exist. They've always said, yeah, but this person over here, the example they use is goldsmiths. This was a couple of years ago, so probably not a lot of people remember this. A few years ago at Goldsmiths, Miriam Namazi was giving a talk on Islamism and the problems that she faced when she was growing up Muslim. And the Muslim Students Union interrupted her, unplugged her projector, were throwing things at her, and were yelling safe space at the same time. Now that is in no way a safe space, but they yelled the word safe space. So a lot of the time when I explain what a safe space is, people will go, yeah, but what about those guys who threw a projector at Miriam Namazi's head? And I'm like, hey, they could have yelled anything. They could have yelled, you know, Kentucky's 5 for 5 deal and thrown it at them. And we wouldn't be like, well, the 5 for 5 deal is not great because those guys threw a projector at Namazi's head while they were saying it. And so again, what I think my obligations are when it comes to being a social justice warrior aren't to make anyone feel bad, but to explain things, common terms that get people upset, that people think are silly or stupid or make no sense, to explain them in layman's terms so that people can understand them. And more importantly, help people understand that we really are on the same page when it comes to a lot of this. And that when you get past those bad actors or those people who misuse terms, you'll find that I think pretty much everyone, and not everyone, but pretty much everyone that I've had a reasonable conversation with goes, yeah, I guess I'm a social justice warrior too. You know, they take on that label just as happily.
Well, let's parse that out a little bit, because I'm definitely not a social justice warrior, although I have nothing really against anything you've just said, obviously, right? I think that you're right. A reasonable person will take what you just said and happen to agree with it. But the reality is that these terms have been overused, hijacked, manipulated, and gone to forming a specific ideologue or agenda, especially from the intersectionality or feminist standpoint theory of things of that nature. So when you say things like safe space, for example, like I ride the bus a lot, and that's a safe space for runaway teenagers, right? It actually, even, I think, even says in there something like a safe space, or that means that that kid can go there knowing that if he's an abusive family or something like that, they're going to get him to the authorities. They're going to make sure that he's protected. And these groups, like you said, when you're putting yourself out there and you have something to say, you do not want other people throwing these invectives and pejoratives and these empty rhetoric things like, oh, you're going to burn in hell because you're a transsexual kind of thing. I get that, right? That is what I consider to be a valid, safe space. But I think what people mock is there are cry rooms. There are literally now on campuses rooms just set up so you can go have a good cry. I think people think that's like, and I do, that's taking what you're saying, the original type of safe space, and just taking it to an extreme. Or the safe space, like in the internet here, as you know, these are not safe spaces. Now, granted, there's some kind of moderation. If somebody was to come in here and start bagging on somebody because they have to be gay, I would fuck their world over, right? Because we don't tolerate that shit. That's not because it's a safe space. This is because we're not assholes. So you have to be really careful, I think, and not you specifically, but people in general, when they hear these terms, what does somebody mean by it? If you're going to explain to me what a safe space is or a social justice warrior from your perspective, as you did, I got no issue with any of that. Really, none. Right?
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really valid pushback, right? Which is, who do we let define these terms? And you actually brought it up at the beginning in a way that I think is amazing, which is skeptic, right? I have not let the fact that when people hear skeptic, they might think I'm a vaccine crazy person or a 9/11 truther or a flat earther, right? These are people who have all taken a good label and twisted it and misappropriated it for their own use.
Absolutely.
Similarly, I don't let someone who abuses the term safe space for whatever reason, be it goldsmiths or some kid losing their mind. And I'm a college teacher. I teach at a university in New York, and like my kids lose their minds all the time, right? They are 19 if you have ever taught a 19 or even interacted with a 19-year-old, if you've interacted with anyone under the age of 25, and they are going to lose their shit over nothing 7 times a day.
I would be going to jail at 19. My threshold's like 28 to 35 at this point in my life. I don't even take the chance of anybody under 21. If you can't have a beer, probably not going to be hanging out with you.
Right. And I'll point out, because you brought up college students, and this is sort of the metaphor I always use that I think helps people see this, because they'll say, well, what about what happened at this college? Or what about what these college students did? And the example I always give is, yes, that's bad behavior. I disagree with it. I don't let it define my terms, just like I don't let a vaccine skeptic define, the word skepticism for me. But similarly, if I went to Bob Jones University tomorrow, or if I went to BYU tomorrow, and I found some 19-year-old kid and just blasted their theism, we wouldn't be like, yeah, Eli, you win. We'd be like, why are you picking on a 19-year-old, man? So similarly, when it comes to social justice, if someone shows me a crying 18-year-old girl screaming at someone, I'm like, yeah, man, that's a kid. It's a baby.
But that's
go find me.
But that's the face of it.
So,
honestly, when people hear social justice warrior, the first thing that comes to my mind is idiots like Steve Shives, right? I mean, that's I think normal for most people when they hear these terms like social justice or this emo, unattractive female shouting about feminism on stuff she's never had any real experience in college. She's just out there promoting literally what she's been told to parrot by feminist standpoint theory, that somehow knowledge is somehow different between the sexes. Like literally science differs between a male and a female depending on how you're taught it, because male knowledge is different than female knowledge according to them. I think that's crap. Right.
But again, we wouldn't hold any other set of beliefs to that standard. And I think it speaks not to the set of ideas itself, but to what the societal construct has been around it, right? Just as we wouldn't say, what's that guy, Charlie Kirk, right? If I say, well, I find Charlie Kirk best epitomizes conservatism, right? Locke would rise from the grave and put me in a headlock and be like, that is not what I meant by the freedom of ideas, right? And yet, right, it would be unfair of me to say Charlie Kirk represents conservatism, just as it's unfair for me to say, a 17-year-old who doesn't know feminist, right? It's not even that she's taken a feminist studies class. She's thought about taking a feminist studies class, right? Because I've taken a ton of feminist studies, and when people are like, well, you explain intersectionality to me, I do, and 10 minutes later, they're like, oh, I believe that. Yeah, that makes sense, right? I don't think a lot of people reject intersectionality as an idea.
I do, sort of. And let me explain why. And let me explain why. And this was a This was a fascinating discussion we had with, obviously, and you watched it, and most people are familiar with it when we had Carl Benjamin on with Brittany Simon. By the way, he was a wonderful human being. I got to hang out with her the other day. She is a wonderful human being in real life as she is on the internet. Surprising, I know.
She's very much in your camp, Eli. Very much.
Oh yeah, she's a feminist. Oh yeah, and and we had this almost a similar discussion because her and I think pretty much exactly alike a lot of things. We just have different terms for these things. I'm okay with that as long as I get her concepts and she gets mine. We can have a dialogue. I don't have to use the same terminology she uses. But we were talking about intersectionality. To me, it seems like this narrative of persecution versus privilege. And when people get together and they say, wait a minute, what group is mostly persecuted? What group has more privilege? I don't know if that's a really appropriate way to really have a dialogue about the actual issues we're having, because at that point, it's just people complaining about persecution porn. And I've seen that too often with other groups that they want to be victimized. They want to be marginalized because it gives them a platform. And I'm not saying that to you by any means, but that is what we see as outsiders when we look at the intersectionality movement, right?
Right, but there's a difference between the common understanding of intersectionality and what intersectionality actually is, right? So intersectionality... And
I'm willing to entertain that, yes. I'm willing to entertain that. I really did understand the distinction. Right.
So Grace Lee Boggs, who is a brilliant author, who I highly recommend, she talks a little bit high, but if you can make it through her stuff, get in there, have some fun with it. She really propagates the term intersectionality. It's got nothing to do with persecution. It's actually got nothing to do with who is more persecuted or less persecuted. And the example I give to, and I think we're all intersectional under this definition, the example I give to explain intersectionality, and this is the academic definition of it. Right now, look, I want to admit right now, because when I give these definitions, and before I give this definition, I always get the same response. People say, okay, But that's not how I hear intersectionality being used, right? When you hear intersectionality being used, it's someone on Twitter saying, how dare you, as the kitty cat, tell me that I can do this, that, or the other thing. And again, I'll just point out, and I know I'm a little bit of a broken record here, we do not let the worst actors of any other set of ideals define it. Right? We don't let, atheist dude 426 who like tweets kill the Jews define all of atheism. Similarly, if someone is misusing the term intersectionality, which is an academic term defined by Grace Lee Boggs in her work, to mean where the crossover is in between different forms of social justice, something that I think we're all interested in and explore, it's our obligation as interlocutors, and more importantly, it's our obligation as educators to use those terms correctly, not to not correct that crazy person on Twitter, right? If that crazy person on Twitter, for instance, says, hey, I'm Jewish, so I'll use Jewish stuff as an example because I don't want to upset anybody. But, if there's a Jewish person on Twitter who says, you can't discuss the Holocaust because you're not Jewish, right? Which is how you hear intersectionality being misapplied on a pretty regular basis. Or you can't talk about anti-Semitism because you're not Jewish. Not only is that not intersectionality, it's the opposite of intersectionality, because as Boggs describes intersectionality, it is, what is your social justice for? And to what does your social justice apply to? And the example I use all the time is my atheism does not exist in a vacuum. My atheism is specifically based on the creeping problems that theocracy creates, not the personal beliefs of individuals, and not even the underlying ideas of those beliefs, although I'm certainly interested in those topics. It is, what does theocracy do? How does it affect women? How does it affect gay people? How does it affect trans people in this country? That is Boggs's definition of intersectionality. It is how one element of social justice, in my case, the fight against theocracy, interacts with other elements of social justice, racism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. And again, while it's very easy to fall into the trap of saying the majority of the time I hear these ideas being used, they're being abused, it is our obligation as interlocutors and as educators to correctly use those definitions, no matter how badly the people use them, right? Just as we won't let Matt Powell define atheism as wanting to fuck kids and deserving to die, right? Now, let's be fair. The definition most commonly used of atheism is believing in God but hating him, or in your heart that God is right. I mean, the things that are all on our Twitter timeline. Right, exactly.
You're just another theist denying his belief in God. That's all.
Right, exactly. That is the commonly used.
Don't start channeling Saitan.
That's the commonly used definition of atheism. But we see it as our obligation as educators to use it correctly and to deal with the arguments that are made against the ideas as we mean them, not the ideas as they're being strawmanned by our opponents.
Yeah, but those are usually the loudest voices.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
When you look at not just say problematic actors as individuals, but do you think that some of the ideas tend to get pushed too far? I mean, I've seen universities try to ban clapping and switch to snapping fingers because it might trigger somebody to clap. You have people who,
that's just ridiculous.
Like if you're an arts major, let's say, then I have no problem with you running away to a safe space if there's a difficult topic coming up that you don't want to have to deal with because it's maybe not necessary to you being an arts major. But if you're like training to be a psychologist or a doctor or something where there's going to be other people's lives in your hands, I don't necessarily want that person that can't deal with talking about a difficult topic without having to kind of run away. And because there's people who are just like, I don't want to handle this particular, they're going to be talking about sexual assault of some sort. That's triggering to me. I'm going to excuse myself from the class and expect to be able to pass without, putting the work in that area. I think that those people who have those issues should definitely have counseling. They should have support on site and whatnot. But there's a degree to which if we placate everything that could upset people, that you just end up with people who are not used to dealing with anything difficult coming out of schools. And that, to me, seems concerning.
Exactly. It isolates them, right? If it prevents them from handling situations, I think it's a disservice. I think it actually prevents them from growing. It prevents them from maturing. we have to be exposed to difficult things. We have to be exposed to things that are triggering and that we don't like. And that is how we learn to deal with them and cope with them and understand them. And I think this isolating kids at a really early age doesn't do them any good.
Well, it's interesting because you've exemplified two of the things that come up when I talk about social justice. So the first is, what about XYZ, right? Where someone will bring up such and such happening on a campus. The first thing that I find, and I don't know if it's true of the thing that you just mentioned about the banning clapping, every time someone's ever brought something up along those lines to me, it is either one child, by which I mean an 18 or a 19-year-old, behaving badly, which, again, we don't use to define any other set of ideas, or it turns out not to be true. And I cannot tell you how many links I've been sent over the year by people.
Oh, no,
what
yeah,
about
yeah.
this university that's banned this? So, for instance, I know that I get told about clapping bans all the time, right? Most of the time, what people are talking about when it comes to clapping bans is an encouragement of sign language applause. And that's not a ban of clapping. You're still allowed to applaud. 99% of the time when someone says they've banned clapping, it's just that a concert or a venue has encouraged sign language. And the only reason you encourage sign language is because if you have hearing impaired people around you, they want to participate in the applause. And they get to, if you're sitting in a concert and watching a stage and you're hearing impaired and you don't have a loop, and let's face it, it's incredibly difficult to be hearing impaired in this country. If you don't have a loop,
even if you are, can't they kind of see people clapping and clap too?
Well,
just as well. I guess.
Just for the point of order,
I'm not trying to be.
No, I get that, but there's a huge difference between banning X and promoting Y. Those are completely different things.
That's
no, I agree.
So
I totally agree.
I would ask that in that case, are you actually looking at a clapping ban, or did someone just what is the specific language? And again, I'd believe you if you said they actually banned clapping, but 99% of the time,
I think they tried to.
Yeah, 99% of the time.
I'll give you a more concrete example, because this one I can back up and I can send you the documents on this. This one I have looked into. It is legit because I watched it in real time. There was a group of organizations, I believe it was in either Scathing that actually started it, but they wanted at a college campus that if a member of any sports team, primarily this was football, but if they were accused of any kind of sexual misconduct, not that they were convicted, not that they had evidence, if they were accused of some type of misconduct, they had to write a formal apology. That, I think, goes beyond what any kind of social justice warrior should ever advocate for.
I'd need to see the language of it. Just because it's not my.
But that's the stuff. That's the kind of things that I think people see more often. And again, you're absolutely right. No one person should be the spokesperson for anything, right? I'm not even a fan of some of the new atheists out there. But when you have people with large channels, you have people with platforms, you have people with voices, people that can write, can speak eloquently, and can talk about these things. That is what the majority of people are going to listen to, because that's what is being promoted. Now, I agree with you very sincerely. I think your understanding of these topics is not like most people's understanding of them, right? Because all they're going to see is what I see from them, and what we see is the more bizarre aspects of it.
Right. And more importantly, the question we need to ask ourselves as educators, right, is why are we seeing the bizarre elements, right? Why aren't you seeing the bizarre elements of mathematics departments? Why aren't people writing about how they want to shut down, science departments when crazy things show up on retraction rock? Right.
Have you met a creationist?
Right, but they don't make, well, exactly, that's the thing, is those people don't get a full-page article in Newsweek. And the answer that I would give about why these, bad actors, why these crazy people who give these terms a bad name are getting so much exposure, why so many people hear safe space and think of the misuse of a term, is because there are motivated, well-budgeted right-wing actors who are pushing that narrative with a specific agenda. Which brings me to the second half of what I was going to talk about to David's point, right? Which is that when we talk about how social justice going too far, one of the things that we have to understand is in the context of what? Now, you're Canadian, but I'm from the United States, right? In the United States, Republicans have introduced not one, but 2 bills so far this year to make protesting on campus illegal. illegal. They also introduced a bill into Congress where it would be legal to run over a protester with your car if they blocked your car. Now, these are giant violations of freedom of speech.
I have a problem with that.
Yeah, me too. And yet, we hear nothing about them.
Cars' rights matter.
Right. And the reason we hear nothing about them is because there is a concerted, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, there is a concerted right-wing effort to downplay their bad actions while pushing forward the bad actions of the so-called extreme left. Right. And this comes no matter what, right? There are entire YouTube channels dedicated to this. My fellow Canadian, or not my fellow Canadian, my Canadian, right? Jordan B. Peterson, famous Christian apologist, languishes in obscurity, right? The most fame he gets is by being on TV with Richard Dawkins on the CBC, telling him that his beliefs lead to the concentration camps and the gulags of Russia. Then he fucks off to his class. But when he starts lying about a Canadian law, and by the way, it's over now, so we know he was in fact lying. But when he starts lying about this, all of a sudden he gets attention.
He misrepresented it, to say the least.
Yeah.
He
All of a sudden,
it was
his
very
Patreon
misrepresented.
dollars,
Of course.
his Patreon dollars start to creep up farther and farther and farther. Now he sells postmodern Christian apologetics to atheists for $60,000 a month. Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk, that asshole, has a multi-million-dollar budget from the Koch brothers. You follow a right-wing pundit, you will find big money. And so the reason that we see these things, these bad leftist actions, more often than we see them being used as their definitions. And the great example of this is there are hundreds of safe spaces on campuses all over the United States right now. They operate every single school day. And we hear about the 1 to 5 times something crazy happens to them. Take, for example, as a counterexample, how often something crazy happens in therapy, right? Or how often something crazy happens in an academic journal. And yet, when you say therapy, I don't automatically think of therapists training their patients in dog cages, which we reported on earlier this year. There was a therapist who actually kept her patients in dog cages to motivate their self-esteem. And that is because there's not a concerted right-wing effort to make you dismiss this terminology so that the left is so busy fighting amongst itself, it can't see, and I mean this genuinely, not like white supremacy, I mean literal white supremacy being used throughout the internet to empower candidates like Donald Trump.
Where was the doctor, Steve, that was prescribing turpentine or something?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, there was an actual legitimate doctor that actually prescribed turpentine. But you know what's kind of funny you mentioned poor Peterson. It was the left and it was the social justice that made him who he is because of the way they approached it. They
totally
were so radical to him. Really? They were so radical that people.
It's the same argument people made for Milo.
But when Milo's a little different case. But when you look at the videos, right, and I'm trying to be objective as possible. I'm not a JP fan, by the way. Trust me on this. But when you listen to the
he's smart, but he's wrong.
They were so over the top that anything that JP was saying was lost. In the fact that he misrepresented Canadian. Well, that wasn't actually a law; it was a proposed law, but he totally misrepresented it. I totally agree, but they approached it, I think, very poorly. I mean, but just from an outsider looking at that.
I don't think they approached it poorly. I think he played them perfectly.
Oh,
look,
sure.
You got a room full of 17-year-olds, right? You got a room full of 17-year-olds, allies and trans kids, right? You're using highfalutin postmodernist language to beat around the bush to saying, I don't think non-binary identity is real, and I won't use pronouns that you weren't born with, right? Because that's what he really beat around the bush to say. So you get some kids screaming, you push those videos out there, you start a victimhood YouTube channel, and more importantly, you tour around as many wink, wink, nudge, nudge white supremacists like Steph Molyneux as you can, right? Promoting scientific racism, promoting postmodern Christian apologetics, whatever it is you're promoting. That's where his money came from, right? It's the same thing that happened with Milo. Milo was just I wrote a whole blog about Milo. Milo's just a Catholic apologist, right? But what did Milo do? Milo waited until he was ignored, built a following of white supremacists funded by white supremacists. By the way, I'm not abusing that term. I mean literal white supremacists. Like,
No,
you can
you mean exactly what I think of when I think of white supremacy. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Yes.
sometimes that term's been overused and people don't know. And you can Google all this shit, look them up. But like, you know, he builds this following of vicious white supremacists. Then he does something that can't be ignored, right? His doxing of Leslie Jones and his misuse of her Twitter, gets himself banned from Twitter, riles his fans up with a victim narrative. Peterson played the exact same game, and he played it perfectly. But here's the great thing about Peterson's game, right? If he had said those things and the college students hadn't reacted, he just builds a following by courting people with bad ideas. And he builds that following and builds that following until he's large enough to do something extreme enough to catch the attention so that he can't be ignored, right? He found the tipping point relatively early on by lying about a Canadian law, and the right wing in Canada were desperate for something to lie about when it comes to Title IX protections, as they're known in the United States. But that's the amazing thing about being right wing, is because you're not confined by the truth, you're simply confined by how many people you can piss off or trigger, as the case may be, you always end up winning. Because when you don't nail it, right, when people don't react to you, you don't disappear. You just build up the following that likes you for the terrible things you're saying.
Well, didn't Milo, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't follow Milo that much. I've watched some of his stuff. But didn't Milo, a couple years back, he actually resigned from Breitbart because of some of the comments he had made in relation to like pedophilia and other things? And he actually turned that into a boon for him. He actually, I think, came out ahead.
Well, not a boon. Not a boon, because he lost his book deal and now he just uses the money.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, he made it into a victim narrative type thing.
Exactly, but see, that's the difference. But he went from a $10,000 speaking deal at a right-wing convention, at a right-wing political convention, to losing his book deal. And this year he got on Facebook to say that he was all out of money, that he's having to rely on the generosity of one or two donors. Yeah, no, I don't believe it either. But this is someone who was destroyed explicitly by a deplatforming movement, you know? And while it's fine to
live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. I mean, this is what I don't get from either the right side or the left side.
They're all going to get attacked far before. Far before Milo did his thing on the Joe Rogan show and all the pedophilia comments and all that kind of stuff. But when I wasn't really all that familiar with him, there was a project that I was working with locally, and a person who was doing a documentary about lack of support for male victims of domestic violence, because there's a bit of an issue there. Where, I mean, you have some like homeless shelters and stuff that's different than like a proper support shelter. And so anyway, they were trying to shine a light on the lack of support in that area. And Milo was one of the people who had come forward and wanted to help fund that. And I had spoken to him at the time, and it seemed very genuine in the sense when he was talking about, you know, there's a problem with suicide amongst young boys, and, you know, like there isn't support in certain areas. There's unbalances that aren't often addressed by feminism, or at least not by all feminists. But I mean, he was relatively tame in at the time, I would say. But then you could see that sort of change and build and whatnot over.
Well, and we should talk
appearances
about
later on.
Well, you bring a great point up, right? Which is the manipulation of good ideas by bad actors, right? And men's rights activism is one of the best uses of that. You know, I wouldn't call myself a men's rights activist because people would say, "Oh, you're associated with Paul Elam, etc." But I don't let people define that term for me. If I'm having a conversation where I can talk for more than 10 seconds, instead of I wouldn't write men's rights activist in my Twitter bio, because someone would just go, "Oh, I understand that to mean," and not ask about it and dismiss me out of hand. But if I can talk about it, if someone says, "Hey, are you a men's rights activist?" I say, "Absolutely." Let's talk.
So how is that sort of mentality any different from people who say, "I don't want to label myself a social justice warrior," because of how people will take that and dismiss it offhand?
That's why I totally understand people who would say, "Hey, I don't want to label myself a social justice warrior," or if you don't want to use the term safe space, even though you understand the real definition, or trigger warning or something like that. An example I use all the time is when I'm speaking to people who I don't know I'm going to win over, instead of the word privileged, I use lucky. I have never had a white guy scream in my face because I've used the word lucky. I have had white guys scream in my face because I've used the word privilege. So it's about walking that balance and knowing your audience, right? Similarly, I believe in men's rights activism a tremendous amount. I think circumcision is something that needs to be dealt with. The problem of male rape is something that needs to be dealt with. High rates of male suicide. It is when bad actors like Paulie Lamb, who I just used an example, right? It's when bad actors like Paulie Lamb use good causes to distract from other good causes, right? They sort of use the opposite. We're talking about intersectionality before. They use the opposite of intersectionality because they're not really wanting to talk about the problem of rape among men. They don't really want to talk about problems about suicide statistics. What they want to do is they're using their activism to shut up other activists. And that's the difference, I think, between true crusaders. And you can see there are really amazing men's rights activists about that. And the truth is, in an intersectional mindset, going back to intersectionality, men's rights activism and feminism are intersectional. Why am I a feminist? Because I believe in men and women's rights, right? Feminism is not about female superiority, right? It is about promoting equality, right? And so,
I mean, so how do you respond to? It depends on the feminist, right? I mean, how do you respond to the sort of more radicalized? All men are misogynists, and all white people are racist by default, and there's no. It doesn't matter if you actually have any opinion on the topic. This is how we label you, and like, how do you respond to those, like that sort of subsect?
How do
let me address that real quick, Eli. Let me address that. Because I think that David makes a really great point that I was going to get to. You're discussing things more like egalitarianism, which I think any rational person would agree with, right? But there is a narrative out there. There are, and by the way, we have had MRA, we've had MGTOW, Dean Esme was a big leader in that. He's a radicalized piece of shit, right? But there are people that say, like, we should never give women the right to vote. That's not a rational position, right? Or men are all the same type of rapist pieces of shit. Or my favorite is that, oh, you're a heterosexual cis white male. You should have no opinion on these topics. You're not allowed to speak against racism. You're not allowed to, as you pointed out earlier, if you're not a Jew, you can't talk about the Holocaust. Well, I am Jewish, but that doesn't matter, right? People have conversations.
But you've also been called a Nazi, so.
Yeah, exactly. This narrative, and I love the way you put this, Eli, by the way. Props to you. You had said that intersectionality is very much the opposite of those things, and that you should be having these discussions regardless of your position in life. And I do believe white privilege is a thing. I get shit for that, but I can actually make a good argument for that. But when I've been told, for example, that I can't, as a white heterosexual cisgender male, talk about things like gender non-binary or things of that nature, it's a little discouraging, because I think that's a very opposite message than people like yourself that have obviously been well researched on this. I gotta admit, you're the most articulate, informative person I've seen to date on feminism, maybe with obviously some exceptions like Brittany and Emerez, who's both equally as articulate as you. But it's rare. It is very, very rare. Because we deal with more radicalized.
To be fair,
persons.
I mean, I'm trying to play devil's advocate a little bit by like pushing on the buttons that I hear pushed the most often, right? Like,
no, and I agree that it's fair. And the answer that I would give is I find it a responsibility to represent these ideas with intellectual honesty, just as I am intellectually responsible, right? Joel Osteen has millions more followers and listeners. Wow, I hurt Dave's feelings. I'm so sorry, Dave. Just kidding.
He went to a safe space. Dave had to go to a safe space.
It ran up. No, but Joel Osteen. Right. Joel Osteen has millions more followers than me, and yet he defines atheist as theist, secret theist who hates God, right? Similarly, though there are bad actors in my community, I represent those ideas as the way they're defined. I represent those ideas as they're defined within academia. I represent them with subtlety and nuance, and I don't let the bad actors scare me away from those ideas, because they're incredibly important, and we live in a time where we are trying to be tricked away from those ideas, right? Who's trying to convince us not to be feminists? Who's trying to convince us not to be race? Or who's trying to convince us that, anti-racist movements are the real racist ones, that Colin Kaepernick is a big deal, that this, that, and the other thing? Who's doing this? right-wing think tanks, right? I refuse to be manipulated by those bad actors on the right while they do real demonstrable things. And to sort of put the cap of why I'm willing to sway so much in my definition and stick so solidly to the academic definitions, even though there are bad actors who disprove me all the time, right? Even though there are far more bad actors within any group you'd like to get, right? There are far more bad actor atheists than there are good actor atheists. If you randomly put all the atheists in a bag and pulled one out, the chance that that atheist is philosophically grounded in his atheism is slim to none. We were talking about this before we started, right?
Well,
When you say that you're a philosophical,
do you think I'm grounded in my perspective from our conversation?
yeah, because
earlier?
you're a philosophical agnostic, right? But if you pull a random atheist out of the bag and you say I'm a philosophical agnostic, they're going to go, wrong. Right? Because they're not a Bertrand Russell atheist. They're a Sam Harris atheist. And look, there's a lot to be said for the importance of mainstreaming good ideas, right? But the truth of the matter is that if you don't come to atheism from a philosophical background, you probably don't have a lot of counter arguments to the philosophical arguments of atheism, right? It doesn't mean that you won't practically be able to disprove theism.
So when you brought up,
that's very much correct. I think that's very much correct. I like the fact that you put it forth as there's an academic understanding of these things, right, in the literature. And I try to explain to people, you mentioned Russell, and most people have not even read anything like, am I an atheist or am I agnostic? And I like Sam Harris's approach for certain things, like his objective morality, but this new atheism movement, I understand, is to promote the normativity of atheism. I get that. But at the same time, I think they're doing a disservice. I think they shoot themselves in the foot by discounting the fact that in philosophy, in the literature, overwhelming, of course, atheism is an actual belief. It is the rejection of theism, such that it is the promotion of the idea that there are no gods. That is what it is in philosophy. There's no really argument to be had there. Now, whether you accept that definition or not, that's up to you. I mean, again, this goes back to what do you want to define yourself to be? If somebody is articulate and they know the concepts, they can call themselves a squirrel. I don't give a fuck. Right? It is what they are trying to promote as an ideology and the reasons. I want to know what their reasoning is, not what they label themselves per se. So when somebody says something like, oh, well, Steve, as a philosophical agnostic, you have to be either theist or atheist, I automatically discount what they have to say because they're more focused on the labeling, which, by the way, they're wrong, than understanding what I mean by being somebody who's a philosophical agnostic, because they're not listening at that point. They're more focused on the terminology. And I find that to be counterproductive.
And this is the problem
Eli,
with pop anything. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes,
I was
exactly.
going to say, you mentioned like right-wing actors kind of like pushing for the negative message and kind of thing. But how do you feel about some of these situations that are cropping up where that's specifically happening? We have like right-wing people digging up dirt on people in the left wing from decades past kind of thing, and then kind of using their commitment to not have bad actors in there to force people out, or like sort of the jury by social media, like with I mean, obviously there's people who have been dirtbags and have been like caught being dirtbags, and whatever. Something needs to be done about that for sure. Well, like say people like James Gunn, who was fired from Disney doing the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff because he had some jokes that were probably in bad taste, to be fair. But I mean, 10 years ago, bad tweet on Twitter, right-wing people dig this up, put it out in the public, and then say, now you need to fire this guy, right? Like, how do you feel about sort of that reactive?
Personally, I disagree with it, but Disney's got a brand to watch, right? Disney's got a multi-billion with a B dollar brand to watch, right? So the simple matter of, for you and me, right? If we knew our buddy had made a bad joke on Twitter, and trust me, I got a public Facebook, and there are some bad jokes on baby Eli's Facebook from a few years ago, right? And on the last week's show, right? But like, the simple fact of the matter
Broadway
is,
Disney dream will never happen now.
We might
Disney on ice.
Right, exactly. We might disagree with Disney's choice, but Disney is making a choice as a brand about who they want to represent them. When everyone was getting so upset about the James Gunn thing, I was like, yeah, man, they make people share underwear on their cruise ships. Like, you have no idea how much Disney controls the people who work for them. And that's because they are a highly oiled, Yeah, no, it's true.
No, I've
I
heard
have
that.
friends who have.
It's true. No, I know. You think people are laughing at that, but what he just said. Actually, the costumes are very, very formal. I mean, you literally take off everything you're wearing. You give it to somebody else when they're wearing your costume, and it's bizarre. But
Everything you're wearing,
everything, and you can't break character. You can't. I mean, you can't take off your helmet because you might scare the kids. The whole bunch of rules. But by the way, somebody sent me this, and this is confirmation of what you were saying earlier, both of you, about Canada. You are right; it is legal. I actually have physical evidence of this. Dave, can you show that real quick? So there you go. I mean, actual evidence in Canadian. It is legal to smoke marijuana in Canada. This is clear evidence, evidentialism right here.
Oh, that's so close to where I live. I just need to. I need to jump outside in my. I need to jump up and down in my backyard a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
By the way, that's just David McGinnis cloud only. That's just lit when he lit up that day. This is what happened.
Right? Yeah. I think that we got another picture. Speaking of like interesting things that you might find funny, Steve. This one's, I think, of Eli that we can probably pull up. Maybe he could tell us the story behind it.
Oh, all right. So you'll recommend
this is too creepy even for me.
You'll recommend the gentleman on the left.
Can we get demonetized for this video? This is scary. This might like scare small children.
How does that play into informed consent, Eli?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The look on his face. He's not happy.
Yeah, so I allegedly, and this, I don't know who started this terrible rumor about me, but I allegedly licked Ray Comfort at Reason Rally. I don't know who started spreading that rumor, but it's very upsetting. And this photo is not of me about to lick him in exactly 2 seconds. So whoever started that rumor of me licking Ray Comfort at Reason Rally, it's hurtful to me, hurtful to my future generations, and it definitely did not happen. So yeah.
Did he,
if anyone starts spreading that rumor,
I'm not saying you did or didn't. No, banana. That's what I wanted. Did he taste like banana?
Oh, banana.
Oh. Yeah, was it kiwi or banana? Yeah.
But my question is, like, would it have been social justice if you had licked him? That's the question.
Yeah. The question is, the answer is fear. He tastes like fear.
He tastes like, well, yeah, because I mean,
like
I think Ray Comfort is one of those people that's completely full of shit. I think he's one of those people that actually knows he's so full of shit he doesn't care, because he just is not an honest person, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've watched so many of Ray's movies, and when you watch a lot of someone's content, they communicate things without telling you. I think Ray, I don't think he's honest. I think he has shut off certain parts of the intellectual conversation to himself. I think Ray came up against the question that I think we all come up against, which is that you're going to die and you're going to be forgotten. And you're going to be dead in the ground. There's no heaven. There's no God. There's no angels, all that stuff. No Christian God, at least as we define it, right? When you die, you're dead. And I think that was too terrifying for him to bear. And the message that I get, having watched, again, dozens of his movies at this point, is not of a person who philosophically believes one idea, but of someone who is terrified to believe another.
Terrified of the consequences. Yeah. Well, Ken Hovind does the same thing, right? How many times have we had these discussions or debates with Kent, and almost inevitably toward the end, at some point, he's going to throw into that, well, Steve, you know that you're going to eventually die, and you're going to meet God, and you're going to have to justify it. And I'm like, Kent, I don't believe the shit that you believe in because you're a commensurate liar. That's all you do is fucking lie. You've done it for decades. I've sat there and explained to you shit for ages that you've said you're going to correct, Kent, that you don't. I don't think you're an honest person. So if you're going to lie to me about the shit you do when it comes to young earth creationism and age of the earth and man walking with dinosaur and Jesus petting a velociraptor, which, he believes. Yeah, like he wrote in on a velociraptor. I don't know what the hell. He just thinks that Jesus and velociraptors have this commonality, just like what's his name in the pterodactyl, Matt Powell. If you're going to lie to me about that, knowing full well that you're full of shit, do you think I really am going to believe what you have to tell me about the afterlife? Because you have no more knowledge about it than any rest of us. And I don't have a fear of that. Matter of fact, I don't think that particular story makes sense to me as far as like the burning forever in hell. I think that was added later on. I don't think there's any evidence in the Bible for that to be the original narrative. So at some point somebody says, you know what? I'm going to scare the shit out of you. What's the best way to do that? Oh yeah, burning for eternity. Believe like me or burning for eternity. It's called argumentum ad baculum. And so I don't have a fear of that. And as far as like being remembered, as long as my daughter remembers me, I don't give a shit about the rest of the people. To be honest with you,
Well,
I think I mean we all want to leave a legacy, but if we don't, who cares? I think that what we give back to society is what we give back to our friends and our family. I have had more children born because of the fact that I've gotten people together as a couple and people got married and things of that nature than I could have ever dreamed of in my life. That to me is it's success. I'm happy with that. You know?
Genghis Khan still got you beat.
Here's how I like to direct the conversation when someone tries to scare me, right? Because that inevitably comes up, and I have a lot of Christians who reach out because of our show and because of our position on iTunes. We get a lot of people who reach out, and then Noah tells them to fuck themselves, so they come to Noah's my co-host, tells them to fuck themselves, and they come to me next. And when someone says, you're going to burn in hell and there's going to be fire forever, you're going to have to justify yourself to God, the way I like to direct the conversation is this. I say, okay, you're aware that you've heard the word of Islam, that there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, and that by rejecting that, you are going to burn in hell forever. And you know that more people believe in Islam than believe in Christianity. So you must have a really, really good reason to reject that idea, right? Because otherwise you would, by that fear of hell, you'd be a Muslim. And they go, no, I have reasons to believe in Christianity. I go, fantastic. So the only question I have for you is if we were able to disprove those reasons, since we know that your belief is based on reason, not emotion, because if it was based on emotion, you'd be a Muslim. Since it's based on reason, if we could disprove some of those reasons, right? You don't know it in your heart, you know it in your mind, right? If we could disprove some of those reasons, you would no longer be a Christian. Is that correct? And they say yes. And then we talk about some of those reasons. And that's how I inch people down the line towards atheism when they bring up scare tactics like that. I bring up Islam and the fact that they're going to burn in hell from that. They bring up that they have reasons. And then I say, great, we're no longer going to talk about faith. We're not going to talk about feeling things in our heart. We're not going to talk about the love of God flowing through us. We're just going to talk about reasons. Right? So let's talk about the reasons, and then we can work from there based on reasonableness, right? Based on the reasons that they have for their faith. And you can break those down, right? Because the reasons all break down eventually. And the other thing is when you ask someone to communicate you entirely on the idea of reason, a lot of the arguments that they would otherwise make get thrown out. Right? No one wants to talk about where do flagellum come from. If you say, okay, great. So if I can disprove where flagellum come from, you'll stop believing in God. No one ever goes, yeah, man, you show me where flagellum come from. Rips off their cross and throws it out the window, right?
Yeah, because those are not really the arguments that they are. I mean, those are just kind of red herrings to me in a way, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they want to promote the whole. They want to like suggest that ATP synthase is of God, or they want to say that some kind of bacterial flagellum, things they don't understand, and they do a God of the gaps fallacy in that regard. I totally agree with you. But this is why I think that, from my personal experience, it is more likely for a person who's like a young Earth creationist to, when they start realizing that that narrative is incorrect, that the science that they've been told is bullshit, because it's not science what they've been told, they're more likely to renounce it all. It's like an all or nothing. I've only seen one person that said, I no longer believe in young Earth creationism, but I am atheist, and that was Wayne Fillmore. And I'm not criticizing for it. The fact that he actually was able to realize over several months of us talking to him that young Earth creationism was bullshit, he recognized it and he was able to incorporate that and move on from it. Proud of him. But most young Earth creationists I have talked to, all of them, all the atheists, now that they realize that young Earth creationism was bullshit, they also left the faith at the same time. And so,
and it's because our beliefs are so interconnected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you start knocking down things, it's a domino type effect for certain people, right?
And our identities are made up of these interconnected things. The joke I always make is, if I realize tomorrow that Christ rose from the dead and is in fact our Lord and Savior, I still got to do GAM on Friday. That's my job, right? Whereas you look at someone like Joel Osteen, who almost certainly realizes God isn't real, or Ray Comfort, who I think on some level recognizes God isn't real. Instead, what he has done, what a lot of them do when you have honest conversations, and I've had some really good conversations with religious leadership, when you get down to it, when you get past the reasons and the thing they've been told to say, when you get down to it, it's about who they are as a person, right? what they feel defined by, and more importantly, what they do in the world that they feel defines them. I had an amazing conversation, just one-on-one, it wasn't in public, wasn't a debate, with a Catholic priest. And we got to talking about religion, and we blew through the reasons very quickly just because he wasn't trained in apologetics and I am. So I was just like, pow, pow, pow. Here's all the shit I read in books when I was 20, right? And then what it got to was all the people he helped. And he and I had an absolutely wonderful moment where he realized, and I genuinely believe realized, that the best part of what he considered to be his work for God was entirely human. And if we can move people towards that way of thinking, I think we're going to move a lot more people away from theocracy. And of course, the other side of that is a lot of people with religious belief don't know that they're causing any harm. I cannot tell you how many liberal Christians I know, Baptists, who give money to the Southern Baptist Convention and have no idea what's happening with it. Or good, good.
I think it goes a little different too. Like I think it's also that they don't know that religion is harming them in often cases. I mean, there's so many cases where people like buy into sham medicine, or like, they have a mental health issue and they'll like go to an exorcist or something. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's these situations that crop up and people have this genuine faith, that they externalize their sort of inner ability onto some placebo or something that works a little bit once, and then it's all Bible all the time, or any faith-based system. And they think that it's helping, and it's actually doing a ton of harm. And I think that that's missed. It's not just that they're sometimes doing harm, it's they're being harmed themselves. They're in some ways victim of the system they're in, right?
And again, it's because people are afraid to talk about the root causes of the problem, right? I mean, you walk up to anyone on the street and say, what about the Westboro Baptist Church? They're going to be like, fuck those guys. Everybody hates the Westboro Baptist Church. What's the root cause of the West Baptist Church? Theology.
The Bible.
Yeah.
Right?
They're actually, what's scary is the Westboro Baptist Church is actually, their reading is more consistent with many other Christian versions of the Bible. They're assholes, don't get me wrong, but they're consistently reading in a way that's the way it was
the best
read.
Christians are the worst Christians.
Right, exactly. By the way, we got a super chat, so let me get because I'm not going to save them for the end.
No, please.
We'll
Super chat.
Super chat. Doorknob Head says, just because I share the same planet with Eli and Eli is on the show, I have wood so hard it hurts. Owie. Yeah. I was saying earlier, I mean, I think I'm in love with this guy because, I mean, you are saying so many things that I wish more people in the social justice warrior community would probably, if they would say, it would take away a lot of this radicalized versions that we all seem to have. And by the way, I'm not going to become a social justice warrior, but I'd rather listen to somebody yourself explain it in a way that has productive value to it than what I've heard from feminists that are fourth, fifth wave, that all they want to do is promote this narrative that all men suck, the patriarch, blah, 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 blah. I don't have time for that. If you're not going to tell me what is wrong and how to fix it, I don't give a shit that you have this narrative that men are somehow oppressive. Yes, men have been in charge of things for longer than women. I get that. And should that change? Absolutely. But just by saying all men suck and all men are rapists, and if you're a white male, you can't talk about racism, I have no time for those types of discussions. They're just not productive, in my opinion.
I mean, that's a wonderful compliment. And with it, I issue the challenge to everyone reasonable to say not to let extremists define my beliefs, no matter what they are. I don't let Richard Spencer define my atheism, and I don't let a crazy Jewish guy who says you can't talk about the Holocaust if you're not Jewish define my social justice. And the more reasonable interlocutors that we have who don't reject terminology, but instead use it correctly, the more we're going to see these terms being used correctly. So, the thing that I say to people more often when I give them the definition of safe space, and they go like, yeah, I mean, I agree with that thing you said, but then what about this? What about this? I say, it's your obligation to use it correctly. Next time you hear it, start talking about LGBTQ safe spaces. Come to the one that I worked at NYU. See those kids using mental health care facilities. And when someone uses it incorrectly within your community, call them out. Right? When crazy Twitter user 447 says, a safe space is a place where I can throw as many stuffed animals at Barack Obama as I want. You go, You're using that term incorrectly. You're using the term skeptic incorrectly. You're not a vaccine skeptic. You're a vaccine idiot. And instead of rejecting those terms, yeah, exactly. Instead of rejecting those terms, we claim them as our own, right? I'm a feminist despite the fact that, I mean, you could choose one of a million, right? Not despite the feminist who says all sex is rape, or despite the feminist who says all men should be killed. I am a feminist for every feminist who shares reasonable beliefs with me and needs my support as an ally and as a logical person to represent their ideas and their movement correctly.
Yeah, I know. I love the fact when you said like, oh, when you're skeptic, that analogy with you're not a skeptic in this, you're an idiot. I do the same thing with flat earthers, right? If you tell me that you're a Earth-shaped skeptic, no, you're just a fucking moron. I mean, so I love that analogy because I do the exact same thing. That's not what skepticism is, right? A skeptic, a real honest to God skeptic, unless you're what we call an epistemic skepticism, where you don't believe that knowledge is even possible, and there's obviously even different reasoning for what we consider to be knowledge. But if you're just an idiot who says, I don't know the shape of the Earth, I'm still not convinced either way, you're just an idiot. That's not skepticism. Would you agree?
Sorry, super chats. Yes, super chats. I'll let you get to your super chats.
Super chat. And Kiddu 5, by the way, if you haven't seen it, Kiddu's 5 channel, go check it out. He has some amazing, funny videos. And you're a comedian, so you can go check him out. He's funnier than shit. Steve McRae Steve McRae, do you think Andrew Rappaport thinks his God exists? Even though I think he's a noob. Or knob, I don't. Yeah, I think Andrew does believe. I think Andrew is a true believer. But I think he also knows he's a dishonest piece of shit. He doesn't care whether he gets facts right. If he did, he would.
I seen a great shirt that just said vaccines cause adults recently. I like that.
Yeah, well, like I said, if you're a vaccine skeptic, I agree with him. You're just an idiot. That's not, I mean, that's how do you be a skeptic on vaccines? Go read about this stuff because they're just the people that have been promoting this anti-vax stuff have done more harm to children.
There's fluoride and lead in their needles, and it's bad for you. And it makes you not right in the head.
No, they want to put lithium in the water. Someone's advocating, let's put lithium in the water. Let's just mellow everybody out. Just make them all. But they're actually advocating that position. But when it comes to Andrew Rappaport, I think these people like him are true believers. They're just stupid. They don't know enough to actually know the science, and so they mix everything together. But yeah, I think he is a true blue believer. And again, I'm not against people believing. I think when Dave and Eli talk about how it affects your life and how it affects society, that's where I draw the line, right? I don't care what a person believes on their own time. I'm interested in it. I'm fascinated to have a discussion with it. But if you tell me that you've got to teach it in school, you got to teach creationism in school, you got to teach flat earth in school, teach the controversy, I'm going to tell you to piss off. Because at that point, it's no longer just your belief. It is you are affecting the lives of other people in a detrimental way that is not beneficial to society and certainly not to the future of society, which my daughter's included. I found out that she had a 4th grade teacher that was a flat earther. And I just found this out recently, 4 years after the fact. I'm like, I lost my shit, right? I was like, well, how did you not tell me about this before? But it happens, right? That was my little rant, by the way.
The flat earthers are just they're adorable.
I'm telling you, if there needs to be Darwinism in action, where you have natural selection against these types of people. That's it. They are eligible for the Darwin Award, far I'm concerned, because they do nothing to add.
They're rejecting vaccines, so they're off to a good start.
That's true. Exactly. That. By the way, it's only 2 super chats, so. Continue on.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. This was fantastic.
Well, thank you for coming.
I love this. We're going to get all your links into the video description. Right now, we just have your podcast. So anything else that you want to include in the video description, send to me, and I got some stuff I can send to you as well. But this was one of the more interesting shows that we've had on social justice that I've seen. I enjoyed the conversations that Brittany has had with Carl, and I understand, there's a lot of diversification even in their own communities. But this actually I found be productive because I now can see social justice from your perspective that I don't think I really could before. And if that was the case for you as an educator,
this is exactly.
I'm thrilled by that.
That's exactly why I wanted Eli on.
I'm so
I
glad.
may not
could be
agree
Yeah, I
with
figured
it,
if anybody
but I
could.
know about it. So thank you.
Yeah,
Eli.
exactly. If you can see it, that's great. Guys, thanks so much for having me.
Good night.
Absolutely.
And
You
with
have a great night.
And with Dave, you want to lead us out with anything, Dave, and then we'll turn it over to our producer, and he can lead us out.
No, I think that's it. Just go check out the Scathing Atheist and God Awful Movies and Skepticrat and all the fine podcasts that these guys are making.
Sounds good to me. And by the way, I listened to his podcast, the one that you sent me, and it was entertaining. These guys are funny. Definitely, they're hilarious. So go check out their podcast. And we appreciate you guys watching tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.